right, we will get started. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, rather. My name is Josh Stripmatter, and I would like to welcome you to Stripmatter Wealth's Smart Money webinar series. Thank you for joining us today. Our presentation is titled Family Legacy, Discovering What's Really Important to You. For those of you that don't know us, we are Stripmatter Wealth Management Group, a registered investment advisor located in downtown Fort Worth, Texas. We specialize in investment management, financial planning, estate planning, and real estate investing. We've been in business since 2007 and serve clients throughout the United States. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. All of you have access to the chat feature, so if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to type those in, and we'll be happy to answer those questions for you. Also, we'll be sending out a replay of today's webinar via email, so if you missed something, don't panic. You'll have the ability to watch this again, and you are welcome to forward that presentation and any of our presentations to your friends and family if you think it would be beneficial. Today's webinar is meant to be purely informational and educational and not meant to be tax or legal advice. Please talk to your licensed professional before taking action on any of the information on this presentation. For more information, including key disclosures, please visit our website at stripmatterwealth.com. Now let me introduce our speaker today. Dave Vogel works for Allianz Life out of Minneapolis, Minnesota, and he's a senior advanced market consultant. He helps educate financial professionals on a variety of topics, including tax-efficient retirement, estate, and business planning strategies. Dave earned his accounting degree from St. John's University in Minnesota. He holds his CFP, CLU, Chartered FC designations, as well as FINRA Series 7, 63, and 66 security registrations. So without further ado, I'm going to hand this off to Dave. Good morning, Dave. How are you today?
Yeah, doing all right. Thanks everyone for joining. I'm just going to pull up today's presentation real quick here. And yeah, whoops. Of course, that. 1 second. There we go. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining. I'm with our home office team. We're a resource out there for the field. We do nothing but take questions on taxes, estate planning, trust, Social Security. But we also do presentations, webinars from time to time as well. So today's topic is a good one. It's on family legacy, discovering what's really important. And it's a huge thing out there, especially as the boomers are entering retirement or have entered retirement and are getting a little bit older. Talking about family legacies has, come on, we've got the greatest generation that's in the midst of passing down their wealth as well to the boomers. And so there's a lot of stuff going on in these conversations today. And again, just a quick commercial here. We are not providing any tax or legal advice. Please consult your accountant or attorney. We're just giving some information out today. But good stuff to talk about. I'm going to try and reorganize my here just a bit. There we go. So we're going to talk today about the importance of legacy, the 4 pillars that often are involved in that, and capturing your own family's priorities and legacy wishes. So importance of legacy is huge, right? A lot of times it's everything you've worked for, everything that you've done in life, and it's really important for people to pass something on in often cases. So what is a legacy? Some people, when you hear legacy, you're thinking an inheritance. Is it setting up something in your will? Is it doing estate planning? But the dictionary says it's something transmitted by or received from an ancestor. Okay, so that is all it really is. It's something passed down, right? And it doesn't have to be physical. It can be something other than that. And it really is up to you. What does it mean to you, leaving a legacy behind? So we're going to talk about some of that today. Different people, it might mean different things. Sorry, here. I'm having a little trouble with the controls today. So, it might be something like grandma's china, it might be mom's recipes, her cookbook, some of your favorite meals. Sometimes passing on, a legacy is just having your passion for charity carried on, by your kids or grandkids. And it might be family traditions. Our family over, I'm in my late 40s now. Every, few years, we all go to the same resort, aunts, uncles, cousins, it's a tradition that we all get together and go to this group of cabins. And, it might be any number of things. But we're going to talk about some of those today. These are just generally the 4 pillars of legacy. They may be different for you, but a lot of times it's your values and your life lessons. It might be personal items that have an emotional value. Could be instructions and wishes to be fulfilled, right? And then finally, financial assets, real estate, physical things that are passed down. So pillar 1, values and life lessons. These are things like, that are dealing with ethics and morality, faith and religion, customs and traditions, memories and stories. These can be a huge thing for some people. Sometimes you see a generational clash, with attitudes and whatnot. But if someone's worked their whole life, that was passed down from their parents to them. They might have been growing up in the Great Depression, and they just want to make sure that the kids and grandkids have that same sense of work ethic, right? That they want to see them work hard for what they're going to get, and they don't necessarily just want to leave stuff to them if they don't see that. To others, it might be faith and religion that is of the utmost importance. Making sure that kids and grandkids carry on that tradition. And then sometimes it's just memories and stories. People want to be remembered, right? And so they might have something else that they have in mind for passing things down. Sometimes you'll see certain videos created, or storybooks, pictures, photo albums, just to kind of create a story and to leave for others to remember them by. Physical things, these are things that might generate an emotional response. These are just 4 examples here. It could be anything, dad's baseball glove, mom's cookie platter, family rocking chair, photo albums, things of that nature that trigger a response. For me, my dad passed away about 7 years ago. There wasn't a lot of physical things that he left behind that I wanted, but the cool one I have is I've got his old bowling shirt, and it's got his name on the back of it, and it's got little bowling pin buttons on it, and it's cool. It's unique. I remember him by it. It's something I can hang in my closet and see it. I rarely wear it, but everyone's got a different thing, right? That you might want to have, to keep that emotional connection with them. Pillar 3. So this is where, we're talking about things like, how do things go when you're gone? A lot of times those would be things like instructions for the funeral. Do you want to be cremated? If you have ashes, where would you want them displayed, or maybe spread out in a wake or in a park, whatever, those wishes for end of life planning. Sometimes it's really crucial that, things you want that you didn't see fulfilled are, put in place so that they are. This one here, ensuring for further education. Grandma or grandpa might really want those grandkids that they didn't see graduate from college, but they want to put steps in place to make sure that they do, right? And also caring for a loved one. And this is where it's important to work with an advisor too. They can help for these, end of life planning decisions, working through an attorney. It's not the most fun aspect of doing this whole process, right? But, having things like, do not resuscitate, or, do you want a power of attorney so that, your kids or someone trusted can help carry out your financial wishes with a power of attorney, sign checks to pay utilities and bills and whatnot. And then last, we have pillar 4. This is where, you've got the savings and the investments, your IRAs, there might be a trust, a house, a cabin, other real estate, and other possessions with significant, economic value. It could be cars, a boat, depends on what you have, right? Some people have very, expensive habits or art collections, or whatever it might be. But these are other things that you want to talk about and decide how those are going to pass down as well. So we're going to talk more about this today. Some of the most important part is having the conversations about those 4 pillars. that's one of the things that not everyone does ahead of time. They don't talk about during their life, the values and life lessons. They don't talk about personal items, emotional value. They don't have all those, end of life wishes, with instructions on how they want things taken care of. So these are the questions that you should be talking with your family on. We have done studies on this. It's often found that it is helpful to have those conversations ahead of time. It can avoid, certain potholes in the future when you are gone. Some of those studies, we talk about legacy gaps. Different generations might have different ways of communicating. It used to be, people might sit down on a regular basis and have dinner together, and there wasn't all of these electronics and texting and Facebook or whatnot that the kids and grandkids might be on that mom, dad, or grandparents aren't on. And so we want to make sure that those conversations are had, that it's not just left to chance. And those conversations are important. We just got some text here. I want you to have the house when I'm gone, but your sister wants me not to sell it, right? And one of the siblings might say, let's not talk about that right now, Dad. Okay. We are arguing that it's often important to at least bring it up. A lot of times people are anxious to have the conversation. They don't want to bring it up with mom or dad, right? You don't want to feel like you're pressuring them to make any decisions. Oftentimes the studies show that kids, grandkids are relieved when it's brought up by the parents or grandparents, that they don't want to do it out of respect for them, but they feel that sense of relief when it does. So concerns about a legacy conversation, there is that discomfort. Kids, grandkids don't want to feel like they might be looked at as being greedy, that it might upset the parent, or the parents are worried that it might upset the children that they're having this conversation. But studies have shown that generally both sides feel relieved once you get this conversation started and out into the open. And when it comes to conflict, a lot of times that conflict is going to be worse if it's not addressed while alive. We've seen that time after time where mom and dad are gone, and you might have seen this in your own family, where one sibling says, this is how mom or dad would have wanted it. And it's a statement. It may or may not be fact, but when mom and dad say something like, this is how we wanted it addressed, it might make it easier for the kids to accept that when they hear it directly from mom or dad. So some of those sources of conflict, fulfilling last wishes, how's that ultimate distribution of finances going to go? Distribution of personal possessions. If you've got, I'm just going to say maybe dad has, some hunting rifles, or we gave the example of mom's cookbook, whatever it might be. Everyone's got something different, right? We're not all the same here, but sometimes there's something that might be desired by one or more of the kids or grandkids, and mom or dad might have a very good reason why they decided it's going to be Bill and not Joe that gets something. And if Joe hears it from dad, he might be a lot more willing to accept it and not have that potential conflict when dad's gone, that Bill and Joe are fighting over something, whatever it might be. But just having those conversations ahead of time, distribution of real estate, who's going to be the executor of the will, and understanding the reasons for those choices. A lot of times, parents might think their kids are thinking a certain way. Like they think, well, we want so-and-so to have the house. They've always liked that house. We could see them living there. So-and-so might want, the family cabin. That's always been their dream. And then the third child, they're the traveler of the world. They would more likely want the money. Well, it's not always the case. It might be that the three kids have completely different ideas about what's important to them. Depending on their situation, mom or dad just might be off on what their kids are thinking about it. But it's important to have those conversations. I think, and studies have shown, to have that conversation ahead of time, at least, bridging the subject. You don't have to get down to the nitty-gritty detail. I think that might be too much for many, every personal item, but just talking big picture, making sure that to the best of your ability, everyone's on the same page. This is the fun one. And it's never easy, when we talk about this, fairness, right? If there's more than one child, there very well could be a favored child, right? And there might be a not so favored child or grandchild. How many times have you seen a situation like this where we're just going to say there's two kids and one of them might be around a lot more? They're there providing care for mom and dad. They're there mowing the lawn. They're there, before they go into a nursing home, helping out with lots of things. The other child might not just be physically in the same area. They might have moved, we're in Minnesota here. They might have moved to California, New York, or Texas, and they're just not able to. But then when it comes time to divvying up the estate, you might see one child be more favored than the other. Is being equal fair, or is being equal unfair? Another way to say it, is it going to be equal or equitable? And I think everyone can relate, either with their siblings or their children. Not always is everyone as deserving. There might be someone with, that has gone out of their way to cause conflict within the family. They may have drug or alcohol problems. They might, for whatever reason. I mean, there's any number of different things here that could come into play, but equal doesn't always, need to be equitable. But these are the conversations that I think it's important to have ahead of time and explain this. Child B might be completely understanding of this situation. Say, yeah, you're right. I get it. It might not like that either, but it's better to have these conversations ahead of time, and it can also lessen that resentment in the future. If this just happens without any discussion, child B is probably going to feel hurt and wondering what the heck happened. But if mom and dad explain all that child A has been doing over the last 10 years or more, or whatever, they might be more willing to accept it. So capturing your own family legacy, bridging the legacy gap. We just think that, postponing those uncomfortable discussions does not always, eliminate the need to deal with the issues. Again, if it's too difficult to talk about now while you're around, think about how difficult it will be for the kids to talk about when you're not around. A lot of times we found that those fears or concerns are exaggerated or unfounded. Like I said, there's a lot of relief from both sides when this topic is, brought up. And family members in conflict may welcome the opportunity for discussion and resolution. Much better to do it now when we've got everyone around than to wait off into the future. So this slide's always interesting to me. The alpha child, we call it. And not every family has this, and if you've got a single child, there's obviously just going to be one. But a lot of times there tends to be that, child in a family that kind of takes on that role. And I'm the oldest of three. I would say in my family, it's the middle child. My sister, got a younger sister. She's always been the negotiator. She it's the typical family, middle child. They always think they have it the worst, but she's also kind of the one that kind of bridges the gap, if you will. And I think now that my dad's gone and my mom and my middle sister are probably having these conversations that I'm not always aware of, just because she's kind of been that one. She's there for my mom on a lot of things because she wants to be. She's there all the time. I'm also in the area and I help with a lot of the physical stuff, if you will. But I feel like most families might have this child in the group. And we're just saying, studies have shown if they have that trusted child, to reach out to them, maybe as a starting point, to say, hey, we're looking to set some things up for the future. We know there's some potential problems. How do you see this situation unfolding? These conflicts between potentially you and the other siblings. So why discuss legacy pillars? It can unite the family members through shared history. Talking about the good times, talking about continuing, for, in my case, those, big family get-togethers, at the cabin. It's less likely to be heated or controversial. Everyone can take away their own thing. When we're not talking about, money here, we're just talking about family values and legacies, but it might also, bringing up this pillar first might be the way to get clues in the direction of other issues, right? Just talking about these things. Preparing the next generation, this one, and this one can involve a lot of planning here, preparing the next generation. So this one is often where you start having those feelings where if you've worked really, really hard, took a lot of chances in life, and you've actually got this, large estate here, and you're worried and concerned about how the kids and grandkids might spend it. This is where working with an advisor and an attorney might start coming into play, talking to them about how important it is, having that work ethic, doing the hard work. But if you're worried about, them just blowing that money in just a short amount of time that took you a lifetime to build, this is where, setting up proper beneficiary designations, maybe you set up a trust with instructions for the trustee to spread that, distribution out over, 10, 20 or more years over life, so that all of that hard work doesn't just get, spent in just a few short years. And then also, just identifying assets, what's going to be preserved, what's going to be sold. Do you want to keep that family cabin? Is it possible that the kids can share it? These are the things that we want to be talking about. And so make the most of your life, plan your living legacy to honor the life you've lived so far. You want to take care of your family and help them through those difficult decisions now rather than in the future at a time of loss. And with the proper planning being done and the decisions being made, you can go on enjoying the rest of your life, knowing that this legacy is going to be maintained to the best of your ability, right? So some of the tips for family discussions, discuss each family member's hopes and key issues to help them reduce potential conflicts and distress later on. Family legacy can be complex, can be emotional. Not everyone's always going to agree. Generally, most people don't on everything, right? Remind family members, that this whole process can bring a sense of relief and comfort. It's, again, studies have shown it's better to talk about it now if possible, because if there are problems now, there's definitely going to be problems when you're gone. Have all 4 pillars in your discussion. Start with the easy stuff first, just to kind of, get into the subject. So again, begin with values and life lessons that you want to see, your family continue. Ask for everyone's legacy priorities in the conversation. You might, like I said, find out that certain kids might have different priorities than what you thought they might have. Be creative in your communication with your legacy priorities, and try not to wait until an illness or health scare. A lot of times this is something that you always think you're going to be able to put off, but then something happens. In my dad's case, we're just scratching the surface with some of these conversations, and he came down with Parkinson's, and it went fast. And we have an idea of what Dad would have wanted. My mom is still around, and she had her ideas about what he would have wanted, but it's not something that we can go back and ask him now, right? So don't wait. That's the other key thing. You never know whether it might be a car accident, a stroke, whatever it is, but try not to wait. Do it while you're able and ready. So enlist help. We mentioned the alpha child. If there is one, there's not always going to be one, right? But if you can find that trusted child that can kind of break the ice with the others and kind of get things rolling, that might be one way to do it. And then lastly, use a financial professional. That's what they're there for, right? They can help you with service. They've been through this situation with many other clients that might have been, through this process already. They can help facilitate family discussions, through meetings or whatever. They're obviously going to have the knowledge and resources. There's a lot of stuff going on with legislation in the last few years with Secure Act that might have changed how IRAs get passed down. And also can help with product solutions. One of those things where if you've got that family cabin or some other physical assets that you want to keep in the family, but there's a child that, there's too many kids for the physical assets, maybe talking about life insurance would make sense. And then, of course, also you should always, be working with an attorney for any of those legal documents, power of attorney, setting up a trust, or things like that. So there we go, Josh. We're pretty much through the presentation here. I know you wanted to have some time for questions. I don't know if any came up in the chat or not.
Yeah, Dave, thank you very much. That was excellent. And folks, if you have any questions, now is the time to type them into the chat and we will answer those questions. While we wait for those questions, just as a reminder, if you have any questions after this presentation, you're welcome to email us at clientservice@stripmatterwealth.com. You can also give us a call or at 817-210-3444. Also, as a reminder, we have some great newsletters that we send out once a week, once a month. So you can go to our website to sign up for those newsletters and then join me every Saturday at 10 a.m. on 1190 a.m. as we host the radio show Ask the Experts. So that said, while we wait just a couple more minutes. So, one of the things that I've noticed in legacy planning, Dave, is that there's kind of a hesitancy with a lot of clients until they get to about their mid 70s or 80s. And so I'm wondering what your thoughts are on to help people to get that process, or at least get them thinking about it at an earlier age rather than at a later age. So a later age rather. And so what are your thoughts on that to help get that ball rolling?
Yeah, I think the earlier the better. Oftentimes, I look just at my own personal situation. I mean, my kids are 10, 12, and 15, right? I have no idea who they're going to be, right? So a lot of times it makes sense to at least wait until the kids are, solidly into adulthood before some of these things might kind of take shape.
Yeah.
But then, you don't want to wait too long. So like you said, often it is mid 70s, early 80s, but in that case, it might be too late. So I think, as you're retiring, I think if you're retiring in your 60s, that's kind of where, things have been put in place. You kind of know where you are wealth-wise and what could or could not be left, during, at the end of your life expectancy. I think that's kind of a good time when you have some time to sit down and think about it, if you will, right? It's not too early, but it's not yet too late where your own health problems have kind of cropped up and, who knows what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think there's a switch that gets flipped for a lot of
Right.
people. I think they wake up and they say, "Oh, you know what? I'm still alive.
Right.
This money."
Right. Yeah, I'll just say
Sure.
for my own experience, my dad was, I think it was 79 when he was diagnosed with Parkinson's, and our first reaction wasn't, "Hey, Dad, what do you think should happen with everything?"
Right.
So you never know when that might happen. So yeah, I think after retirement, while you've got some time and those kids presumably are who they're going to be for the most part, I think that's when it's time to kind of sit down and invite them over, and maybe there's grandkids now. Start having those conversations and start easy, right? Start with the easy stuff and then move on to difficult.
Yeah. One of the things, I've shared this story lots of times, but I teach a class on estate planning, and part of that class is the legacy planning. And as an example of, a lot of people think about family, maybe charitable, but they don't go beyond that to think what they can actually do with some of their interests, some of their things that really they're passionate about. And I always give the example of a library here in Texas, in a little small town in Azle, that a couple donated a couple $1 million to this city, and they built this beautiful library. And it's really the draw of the town because the town is very small. But I always say, that's a great legacy to leave behind, because number one is they can do it in memory of themselves or whoever they want to. But secondly, is they're leaving a legacy behind for the city that they grew up in, and it'll be there for hopefully the next 100 years, right? So,
Right.
example of thinking outside of the box in terms of what you can actually accomplish when you plan ahead for legacy planning.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And those are things too. It depends on the level of wealth you're leaving. Not everyone can do a library. Not some of the ones, too, like a foundation, those donor advised funds, those types of things can be hugely helpful. And it might just be, you don't want to necessarily give everything away during your life, but at death, fund a donor advised fund and have the 2 or 3 kids listed on there, and that they can work together and figure out, okay, what should we donate this year, in mom and dad's name,
Right.
and it might not be millions of dollars, but it might just be they get together, remember good times with mom and dad, and they're going to figure out how to divvy up the 10 grand or whatever it is,
Right. Yep, absolutely. Well, I don't see any questions typed in, so
Okay.
we will end our webinar here, but thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed it, and we look forward to having you back.
All right. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Thank you. Bye-bye.